following public service program is brought to you by the Metropolitan Library System.
My guest today, Dana Bagshaw, lives in England. She was born in Fort Smith. She attended college in Oklahoma and California, worked in Silicon Valley for a number of years before she moved to England. But she is here today because she wrote a novel. It's called Mama Grace, and it's about your family. Actually, I understand it's an adaptation of something that your was it mother?
My grandmother.
Your grandmother
yes.
wrote about her life, and it involves traveling across Oklahoma in a covered wagon with a cow tied on behind.
Yes, that's right.
That was the manuscript that Letha wrote. Was it a completed manuscript? And
it was. She completed it. She typed it up on the typewriter that's on the back cover there, and she submitted it to one publisher, got rejected, and didn't have the heart to do anything else with it. So when she died, my mother gave me the manuscript and said, I hope someday you'll do something with it. It sat there for a very long time. And then with the advent of the Oklahoma Centennial, I thought, well, now's the time to see what I can do with it.
Now, was it a novel, what Letha wrote?
It was a novel, yes. She wrote it as a novel. So I had to keep it as fiction because I'm not sure what's fact and what's fiction in it. I know some of what's it's very much based on her family life, but she changed quite a few things around. And then I revamped the story. I would say 80% of the story is her story, but I changed the last 3 chapters, changed the ending. And that I drew from her younger brother, from his memoirs. So it's very true to life as well. But it was just a matter of making the characters come alive, looking at viewpoint and character development. And yeah, it was fun to work with. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I wondered as I was reading, it was obvious there were all of these viewpoints that I was actually wondering, was that your contribution to the story, or was it your grandmother's contribution?
Well, the first publisher that I submitted it to complained about a vague narrative viewpoint. So I just said, okay, I'm just going to see how I can do this. And I looked at it, and I couldn't pick any one character to tell the whole story from a single viewpoint. So I experimented with the different viewpoints, and it seems to have worked. People say that the characters really seem very real to them, that they feel that they're just right there with them.
Well, Grace, certainly, who is Letha's mother and your great-grandmother,
yes,
seems to be sort of the overarching character for all of this.
That's right. Yeah.
She's the one who holds everything together in spite of her husband. Shall I say. Maybe that's just a female viewpoint. But
no, but I think that's pretty accurate, yes. He was a difficult husband.
Yes, he was. But Grace managed to hold it together, but I think you were able to get in the viewpoints of these kids who were flooded out of their home. They were, in effect, tossed into a covered wagon, no daddy in sight, and they just head off. There's no road, there's nothing.
I know.
There are Indians out there, wolves, you know, the rogue steer, the whole bit. That must have been unsettling, to say the least, about it.
Well, I drove across that terrain. This is my 3rd time this trip, and I just can't imagine how she did it without any roads. It's pretty hilly.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And there aren't any of those convenient signs that we're used to today.
I get lost with the signs.
Well, in fact, in the novel here, she is actually sort of rescued by an outlaw, and in India, and they're sort of heading that way, and Waynoka's somewhere out that way. And I'm sorry, I had visions of them traveling, you know, and reaching California and saying, well,
you missed it.
You missed it. You should have turned left back at the tree back there. Yeah. But they're pointed in the right direction and finally reach Waynoka. They're actually traveling to be with Grace's daddy, who has moved from one part of Oklahoma to another in the Cherokee Strip.
That's right.
I think we forget that even with covered wagons and horses as transportation, a lot of people really moved around a lot, and this family certainly did.
Well, and this was in 1907, so the main covered wagon era was over. And what to me is even more humorous is later, 10 years later, they're still in that covered wagon when they make another trip towards the end of the book. And then
And they get to drive right through Tulsa in that
That's
covered wagon.
and people really are laughing and pointing at them.
Yeah. Well, now, did you, obviously you had the manuscript and family stories. Did you do a great deal of research when you were writing this?
What I did was mostly try to validate what was there, find out as much as I could. I resisted the temptation of adding more things. Research can take you off in a lot of different directions, and I just wanted to focus on the story and the characters. And they were a pretty isolated family. It amazes me that they don't even mention anything about Oklahoma becoming a state in that year that they traveled, but that wasn't their concern.
Right.
And so why shoehorn it in there when it wasn't anything real for the family?
Well, the family had very vital things on their mind, like were they going to have food for the rest of the journey?
That's it, food and water.
Yeah. And was Daddy going to ever show up again? And then when he does, well,
he shows up just long enough to get Mama pregnant with another baby, and then he's off again.
Right.
As one of my reviewers said, he was more of a socialist activist than a family man. I mean, he had a lot to offer.
Right.
But
not as a father
But not
and
as a
family
father,
man.
yeah.
In fact, I believe the last time the children saw him he was complaining that his wife was always getting pregnant. And I remember reading that and thinking, well, yes, but on the other hand, she didn't do it all by herself.
That's right.
She seemed to have a little bit of help from the guy. But yeah, obviously he was his concerns encompassed a great deal more than his family, and I got the distinct impression they got sort of left by the wayside. They were off here and he was looking this way. But it was a very entertaining story. I think you really brought to life just how scary it is to be in that position, and to really, for most of your childhood, wondering, when are we going to eat, where are we going to go to school, and all that sort of thing. I think you did a good job on that.
Thank you.
We have a very brief time. Are you working on another book?
I'm working on the sequel, which is based on the memoirs of Mama Grace's youngest son. And in it, Mama Grace changes more or less from the heroine to the villainess, because in real life she had 12 children. 10 of them lived, but she clung to him when he tried to leave, because she didn't know anything else really. And she didn't know how to take care of herself when the children had left. So it's a story, it's called Running from Grace. And he's trying to make his getaway, and she doesn't make it easy.
Yeah. Well, mothers are sometimes that way. Well, I hope that you will be able to come back when Running from Grace is published.
Thank you.
And we can talk about that as well.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Dana, for being with us. Dana Bagshaw has been here talking about Mama Grace. You'll be able to find it at your library and your favorite bookstore.